Hi there, you're listening to the Estranged Heart podcast, and I'm your host, Kreed Revere. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and if this is your first time here, thank you for selecting this podcast to listen to. As we begin today's episode, I invite you to grab a cup of coffee or tea, settle in, and listen with an open heart. But first, the regular disclaimer. I am not a licensed therapist or counselor. Nothing within this podcast should be considered or taken as therapy. If you are in need of therapeutic support such as counseling, please seek out a therapist near you. Today's episode is titled, What to Do When Dreams Die, Grieving the Loss of Parenting Dreams We Once Had. Before we get started, a reminder, if you are interested in joining the recently reconciled mothers Zoom support group, please feel free to reach out to register. And you can do so by emailing me at theestrangedheart@gmail.com. Again, theestrangedheart@gmail.com. And that group will start on Saturday, June the 3rd. And it does run bi-weekly for 8 weeks, or for a total of 8 meetings. So if you're interested in that, feel free to email me. I will close registration as of Friday morning, June the 2nd. Quotes for today. You don't know how hard the road is to letting go until you're the one traveling it. And that is by Unknown. And the second is, things we lose have a way of coming back to us in the end, if not always in the way we expect. And that is by J.K. Rowling. When I contemplated today's episode, I had recently received stories of, or heard of moms talking about having dreams of their estranged adult child, and in particular, dreams where the estranged adult child dies. And I've talked a little bit about dream work on this podcast, but it is something that I work with daily, and it came about through my own therapy process and working with my Jungian psychotherapist. And Carl Jung did a lot of dream work and taught that back in his day. And so since having learned about dream work, I tend to look at dreams very differently than I ever did before in the past. I always took them to be something fairly literal in my life. And knowing what I know now through Carl Jung's work is that oftentimes our dreams are really our subconscious, unconscious parts of us trying to work out things that we're not yet ready to work out in our conscious minds and being aware of. And so when I hear stories from folks, and not just estranged people, but from anyone who talk about the death of someone in a dream, I now look at that from the perspective of, oh, I wonder what it is about them, the person who's having the dream, and what they're trying to let go of, if it's a dream about someone dying. And so that was the catalyst for today's episode. Another thing that we don't talk about a lot in our society is the death of dreams, meaning, the dreams that we have, if I'm speaking about estrangement, the dreams we have of the relationship we will have with our adult children when they become adults, and or the dreams we have of being a grandparent and what type of grandparent we'll be and what type of, experiences we'll have with our grandchildren, and then again, as well as with our own adult children. And when we go through estrangement, obviously a lot of those dreams die. And I want to talk today about how do we process that, right? How do we how do we process things that we thought would happen, we wanted to happen, and then they didn't. And when it's a long held dream, something as long as, decades of being a parent and wanting to one day have this relationship with our adult child, and then eventually with our grandchildren, and then that doesn't happen. And how do we deal with that? What does that look like? And how can we move through that? I firmly believe that in learning how to process the loss of dreams helps expedite the healing process. Because anytime we, what's the old adage, the old saying that what you resist persists, right? And so we spend so much time hanging on to all the, it should be this way, and I want it to be that way, and it's supposed to be that way because that's what I always thought it would be like, right? Society tells me it's supposed to be this way. I've had this dream since I was a little girl. It was supposed to be this way, so on and so forth. And so when we're trying to let go of that, it can be really, really super scary and frightening. And depending on our own particular life experiences, that also is going to color how we see this, right? So I personally have had many life dreams that never came true. And it did not dawn on me until probably about, 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago, that I was like, oh my gosh, I've had this long held dream of doing this one thing, and it never came to pass, and it never will. And so what do I do with that? How do I unpack that? How do I let that go in a way that feels good, in a way that feels healthy, and will help me to move forward in my life? So I think it's important to recognize this is something, as I said at the beginning, it's not recognized. Really the only thing that's recognized in our society when it comes to the death of anything is the actual death of a human being or a pet, right? We don't grieve the loss of anything if it's not a human life or an animal's life that has passed. And if you stop and think about it, we all experience losses every day, all the time. There are people who experience a loss of, say, physical abilities. And that can happen as we age or by having an accident or something along those lines. There's the loss of having and being able to do specific types of jobs, or having the type of job we want to have, and we no longer can have that. We reach a particular position in life and or our careers or what have you, and it's gone. And then what, right? I think a lot of us spend so much time just going and doing to prevent thinking about all the losses that we've had, right? The busier we are, the more things we're doing, the less time we have to think about things. And I think that's one way that we cope with it. And my personal opinion is that's not healthy, because it's still there and we've not processed it. And until we process it, it remains, and it will come back up at some point in our life. If we're doing the busy stuff in our 30s and 40s and not dealing with the actual loss and grieving the loss, that is likely to show back up at some point in time in our 50s or 60s or 70s. And again, what we resist persists. So I think it's important to recognize it, for ourselves and for those who are able to start talking to other people about it, right? I know it's not like the standard dinner conversation, but I do think it does have value for discussion. And, it's scary. It's scary to think about at first moving on, doing something different, right? We hang on, I think, a lot of the times because it's what we know. And change can be scary. And for some, in the past, maybe it's even been life-threatening. And so to think about stepping outside of the box, to think about actually letting that dream go in order to dream something new, it's very overwhelming, very scary, and filled with the unknown, and not something that a lot of people have a lot of experience with. Like I said, we're just a society that doesn't talk about it. We don't deal with it. We're busy, go, do. And so we don't know what to do with it. So how does one move on from the loss of a dream when it comes to, I thought I was going to have this type of relationship with my child, right? For some of us, that might be, I thought I was going to have a really close relationship with my adult child. They were going to eventually one day come to see what it was like to be the parent of an adult child, or what it's like to become a parent and have a child, and then realize all the things that we went through to raise them. When it comes to grandkids, we have this dream of, what type of grandparent we're going to be. I know for me, I had the dream of being a close grandma, actively involved in the daily lives of my grandchildren. And that never came to be. And it probably will never be. And I don't say for sure, because I am one that I always leave room for hope. I always have that little flicker of hope alive. But for the most part, that's not ever going to happen for me. And so I had to get to a place where I had to recognize how sad that made me. And it still does today to some degree, but it doesn't take me under and leave me incapacitated as it used to. And I would become depressed and, just thinking the worst of everything in life, and that, none of my dreams would ever come true, et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm in a much better place. I no longer believe those things. But yes, it still does make me sad that is something I wanted for my life that will not be. But we have to, in order to process these things and to let things go, we can't do anything if we're not aware of it, right? So awareness is the first step. You don't know what you don't know. So if there is a place in your life where you think, I always thought I would have this, or I always thought I would be in relationship with my kid like this, and that hasn't come to be, maybe give that some thought. What was that original dream like? And maybe, I don't know, maybe you got off course with that dream. Maybe there's a way to get back on course with it and maybe make it something different, right? And then once we have an awareness, then we can begin to look into things. And for me, that's researching things, right? Like, well, what exactly does the loss of dreams mean? And exactly how does one do that? And so I usually go to one of my first 3 things that I normally go to, and I go to Google, and then I go to YouTube, and I'm looking for, how to grieve the loss of dreams. What does that mean? And how does one do that? Right? And that goes hand in hand with naming it and then sitting with it. Right? So I've had this awareness about it. I'm doing some research about it, and I'm finding out, this actually is what has happened to me. I'm really in this place of, I thought I was going to have this, best friend relationship with my daughter, and we were going to be really close, and we were going to go on vacations together, and we were going to do crafts together, and we were going to bake together, and we were going to travel, and all these things. And now I'm estranged, and none of that is happening. Right? So now what? I think it's important to sit with that and really to understand what that means. Right? Was this a dream that the two of you shared? Was it something that just you talked about? Was it a dream that you had, as if you're an estranged father with your son, if you're an estranged son, is it a dream you had about your father and the type of relationship you would have? You have to name it, right? And then sit with that and really contemplate on and figuring out what that means. Because it's one thing to be aware of it, but it's a whole nother thing to process it and actually think on it and figure out a way to get beyond that, right? And then for me, I end up usually journaling about it, and it takes me a while, right? I process it, I think about it, I get angry, I go through the all the stages of grief, right? The denial, the anger, the bargaining, all the things, all the emotions, and I journal on that because it gets it up and out of my head. Generally, when it's swirling around in my head, then it's just causing more anxiety, more depression, and all of those things. When I can get it out, either by verbally processing it with my therapist, or if you have a coach, or getting it out on paper, typing it out on a computer, whatever the case may be, it's getting it out of your head. You're doing something with it. And then I also highly encourage you to think back and reflect back to maybe another time in your life where you have had the loss of a dream. Maybe you didn't recognize it at the time, but you had this loss of this relationship that you thought you were going to have with someone, and you made it through that. And you came out on the other side and you're okay with it, and life has gone on. Think back to those times. How did you navigate that? How did you get through it? And I would encourage you, if you navigated that in unhealthy ways, i.e. addiction, drugs, alcohol, numbing, that kind of thing, I am not encouraging that in what I'm talking about today, because that is an unhealthy way of managing things. All it's doing is numbing, and it's not actually dealing with the reality. So reflecting back to another time in life when you've had some sort of transition, some sort of loss of a dream. Let's just say maybe you had a transition and loss of a dream in a career, right? And now you're dealing with this, through estrangement, the loss of this relationship with your estranged adult child or your estranged parent. How did you deal with that loss of that career, right? Maybe you can apply some of those things to this. I also am a huge fan of doing a grief ceremony. I think that it is super helpful to actually do something with intent, with intention, writing something out, having a burning ceremony where you write out this letter to your former self that had this dream, and it's okay to release it, and talk about, it's okay to have dreams, and it's okay to understand that sometimes dreams die, but it doesn't mean that we can't have new dreams, right? And then burn that piece of paper or what have you. So those are some of the suggestions that I have in actually processing the loss of this dream you have for this relationship with your child or your parent. And then how do we move beyond that? How do we move forward with life and let go of that dream? I think it's important to have curiosity. What else might be possible? None of us know what tomorrow is going to hold. And while most of us tend to go down the negative rabbit hole with that, well, yeah, we don't know. I could be gone tomorrow, and then what's my kid going to think then? Or, those kinds of things. What happens if It's the opposite, that tomorrow comes, or 3 months down the road it comes, and your child comes back, or your parent comes to you and says, I've been working on things and I have changed and I want to have a different relationship with you, a new relationship, right? Those types of things I think it's super important to keep in mind. And I know that it's hard to do that if you don't have curiosity around that. It's hard to imagine something that you haven't even asked the question, is it possible? Right? And have a willingness to pivot. Right? We get stuck on not wanting to change because we cling to what is familiar and what is known and what we can count on happening, even if that's not necessarily healthy for us, right? We cling to what we know. And so it's super important to have a willingness to change, a willingness to pivot. Change is essential in discovering something new. If you take the same daily route on your walk every day, you're never going to know what's on the next street over, or around the next, on the other side of the park, or whatever, if you don't ever go there. You're never going to know the possibility and the beauty that may be waiting for you in this new area. The same thing applies to our relationships. And I think that this is what our adult children are asking for. They're asking for change. They're asking, in essence, to dream a new dream. And so how can you begin to entertain, or at least open up to the possibility of a different type of relationship with your child or with your parent? Maybe it's not going to look like you wanted it to look like. Life happens. Things change. Think about your seasons. Daylight goes into darkness. Life is always changing. And we get stuck and bogged down in expecting it to remain the same. And I'm asking you to open your heart and entertain the possibility of something different, something that's healthy, something that releases a heaviness in your heart. It's not to say that it's not going to come without tears or without sadness. Of course it does. Grief involves those things. But it won't be like that forever. Okay, so I will leave it there for today. I encourage you to maybe entertain looking up Dream Work by Carl Jung, and that last name is spelled Jung. First name is Carl, Carl. And if you're interested in any of that, I think it could be super helpful. And yeah, I think opening your heart and giving yourself some compassion along this path and journey. It's hard to let go of dreams. It's hard to let go of the expectations that we had, the things that we wanted for our life, when they turn out vastly different than what we imagined it to be like. I understand it's no small feat, right? But processing through this, processing the loss of dreams, will help you move forward in your life where you can create new dreams to achieve in healthy, good, and loving ways. Okay, until next time. This brings this episode to a close. I hope that this time together was time you feel well spent and that you are able to find some takeaway nuggets to help you on your journey, wherever you may be on your estrangement and reconciliation path. If you feel you've received something helpful or positive from this podcast, please consider following us, sharing this podcast with others, leaving a positive review, perhaps entertaining becoming a guest on our show, or following us on social media, on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok under the same name, The Estranged Heart. As a reminder, there is an online support group on Facebook. If you are a estranged mom who identifies as being spiritual and approaches estrangement with a sense of curiosity rather than blame and judgment, and desire to do inner self-work and reflection, please seek us out. We can be found at facebook.com/estranged mothers support group. And lastly, if you are an estranged parent or an estranged adult child and would like to have your story shared on the podcast, anonymously or not, please reach out to me via email at theestrangedheart@gmail.com.